So I just saw the finale to Game of Thrones, and I want to start by saying Game of Thrones, despite the ending, is probably my second favorite show of all time. I know the ending is a very important part of a show, and it was kind of ruined, but that doesn't really ruin the highs of the show for me. It's my second favorite show of all time, behind only Breaking Bad. The first 6 seasons, for the most part, were near perfect. I know season 6 was kind of lacking because there weren't much content from the books behind it, and D&D are known better for their adaptation, not as much as their original writing. I would say the end of season 6 was very good. It was very surprising, but it wasn't just surprising, it was substantive. It was near perfect television writing for the first 5 seasons that could not have been done the same way if another show did it, and I think it will always have a place in my heart as a show that I love. That being said, I was in denial after I saw the final episode of the season. As the show kept progressing, I just kept thinking there was going to be something about the ending that was just not necessarily surprising, because it was a surprising ending, but just more true to the characters and better writing. I was in denial after I saw it. I tried telling myself it wasn't that bad, and there were good parts. Episode 2 of Season 8, I thought was a very good, emotionally substantive episode. That was definitely the best episode of Season 8. And afterwards, I kind of just had a sour taste in my mouth, and I really had to think why it left me unsatisfied. I thought the characters ended up exactly where they should be, or at least it kind of made sense, except for Brienne. I sort of realized that it wasn't necessarily where the characters ended up, it was more of how they got there. Season definitely should have been 2 seasons. 1 season devoted to the Night King alone. And I think they shouldn't have just ended it so quickly with the Night King, because he's this big intimidating force, and yes, it was a long, hard-fought episode, but I just felt that was very rushed. It was 3 episodes, and then he was gone, and then he was just done. There was nothing else that he really served to the plot besides getting some of the characters together against Cersei, which was mainly just Jaime, and Jaime just ended up going back to her. And then the next season could have developed a lot more about Daenerys going insane, because that's right after they killed the Night King, she saw everyone was praising Jon, and they all loved him, and she just felt she needed that, because she hadn't had that in a while. And yes, she lost many of the people she cared about, but it was a very quick, steep slope in the madness. It was just a snap, and usually snaps happen with a lot of build-up, like Breaking Bad. If Walter White was just a goody two-shoes for 4 seasons, and then he just snapped at the end, it wouldn't have made sense. And that's sort of what happened with Daenerys. And I'm not saying she should have been bad the entire show, but there should have been more to that. And I'd like to compare Daenerys' arc with Walter White's arc. Now, I'm going to have some spoilers for Breaking Bad. If you don't want them, skip to this point in the video. Now, imagine if we didn't have the moment of Walter White outsmarting Tuco for the first time, and he's banging on that steering wheel. Now, that's a very important scene, because that's the seed that plants his turn. That shows that he's not just doing this just for good. He's not just doing this to make some money on the side, or else he would have just made the money. But this is really turning into something that he is enjoying doing. He's hyped up about outsmarting Tuco, and he thinks he's on top of the world, and that's the high he's chasing the rest of the show. And then another turning point for Walter was when Jane died. It shows that he doesn't have much concern for other people's lives, and she's not very much threat to him, except for what she's doing to Jesse, and he's letting this innocent girl die so he can get what he wants. Or what about the crawl space episode? That was sort of his turning point, where he became more bad than good. And then when he's in the final season, when he's having all those hits on those people in prison, and he's just murdering people like, this is the gradual progression of Walter White into what he is at the end of Season 5. And Daenerys never had these seeds, these moments that turned her into what she was at the end of the series. She never had that crawl space moment early on. Her crawl space moment was sort of when her best friend was killed by Cersei, but that was, the ending of the third to last episode? That's way... And then the next episode, she's just slaughtering thousands of innocents, and that was never what Daenerys was about. And another thing I want to compare is Walter White. The final frame, the final shot of Breaking Bad is where he's just laying there, and Baby Blue, the song, is playing, and he's just looking up, and he has a half smile on his face as he's bleeding out and dying. And the song, the lyric is perfect for this because it goes, "I guess I got what I deserved." And he did. He deserved that because of what he's done throughout the show. When Daenerys is stabbed by Jon, it didn't have that "I guess I got what I deserved" feeling. It's just like she was pure good the entire show, and then she got angry and she slaughtered millions of people when she died. It wasn't earned. It wasn't a descent into madness. It was just madness. She didn't have that perfect scene of "I guess I got what I deserved" that I really felt emotionally. That was just a perfect ending to Breaking Bad, and it was not a perfect ending for Daenerys. Now, I do want to talk about Jon and Brienne. These two were the biggest wasted potential in the show, at least at the end. And I know the main purpose of Game of Thrones was to subvert fantasy tropes, and this does not necessarily mean just going against what you think is going to happen, because there's more to it than that. It's the world is subverting the tropes, and the characters have to have some sort of purpose, whereas Jon, yes, he has purpose, but why was he brought back alive? Why is it revealed that he is a Targaryen? They may be just trying to subvert the trope that there is a chosen one and he will survive on until he accomplishes his purpose, and I guess his purpose was just to kill Daenerys and that was it. I mean, yeah, but it wasn't very clear or built on. And he also didn't kill the Night King because they didn't want that trope of, oh, he's the chosen one, he has to do it. But Arya didn't really make much sense. Like, it makes sense, but it wasn't built upon again. And Bran has the most unique abilities out of anyone in the show. Everyone has different, unique personalities, but no one can do what Bran does, and they don't use this at all for the last season. Like, wouldn't it have been amazing if Bran could have taken control of the dragon that the Night King was riding and used that against him? Like, that would have made a lot of sense, because Bran would have been contributing something, not just sitting in that chair, like, as bait to lure the Night King. That's what he was in the episode, is he was bait, and he, like, turned to birds for some reason. This could have been unique and interesting, where it's not just fighting, but Bran is using the special ability to have a unique sequence that we find entertaining. And one of my favorite scenes of the whole show is the scene with Hodor, not only because it was heartbreaking that this innocent, kind-hearted man, his life was basically ruined by Bran to go back in the past, just for this purpose, to save his life, but it also was just a very weird and intriguing, like, sequence that I don't understand, and a lot of people don't understand, and that's what made it interesting, was that Bran went back to the past and basically ruined Hodor's mind. We don't know how, and that's what makes it interesting. It's not like most other scenes where it's a character betraying another character or killing someone. Not that that's bad, but it's just unique, and it's interesting, and they didn't use that more. They could have had another Hodor scene in the series finale, Like, what is the point of Bran having this ultimate, insane power, and he could have stopped the whole war. He could have told them exactly what they needed to do, but they didn't use any of that. So what's the point? What is the point of having him? I don't have a problem with Bran being king. I have a problem with him being king the way that it happened, because Game of Thrones is about 63.5 hours long, and Bran being king isn't even mentioned until the last 30 minutes. This could have been half of a season, them trying to find out who should rule the Iron Throne after all this madness has happened. But they didn't use that. Why did Tyrion not tell anyone before the very moment they were choosing who should be king? It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, Bran knew he was going to be king, so he showed up. But why didn't Tyrion tell people, so then they could have thought about it more instead of just immediately when it happened? It's so rushed and lazy. Almost every single problem they had in this final season seems like it could have been solved if it was double the length, not had just 6 episodes, or they had a whole nother season to develop these seeds that they could have planted early on, and then it would have made sense where the characters ended up. But they didn't do that. They just put them there and try to get them there as quickly as possible so the writers could go work on Star Wars. Why didn't they just give it to someone who cared? Because now they left this unsatisfying ending to a beloved TV show. There are thousands of people who could have taken over. Maybe they wouldn't have done it justice, but it would have been better than this, most likely, if they'd put time in. Also, I really didn't like that scene where Sam said, "Why don't we let the people decide?" And they started laughing at him. Like, what was the purpose of him saying that? Was it just to show that everyone still thinks Sam is dumb? Was it just to show they don't care about the people? I thought it was going to go in an interesting direction. They're going to have their first democratically elected king, but they brought it up and they laughed at him, and that was it. So what was the point of the line? They could have just cut that out completely, and it would have not disrupted the flow of the scene, and it wouldn't have had a dumb joke against Sam. I thought his character developed from being dumb and laughed at to learning to stand up for himself more and finding his ground. Like, I don't know what the point was of that scene. Now, Arya was one of my favorite characters. Her whole arc was about revenge, and how she reaches the end of her arc, again, makes sense. She realizes that revenge only leads to suffering and pain for the person trying to reach revenge. But you're gonna tell me she went all the way to King's Landing, is in the middle of this massacre that's happening outside. She walks up, and she's in the next room over from the person she's trying to kill, and then the Hound just goes, "Turn back, kid, you don't want to end up like me." And then she leaves. That's not Arya. She wouldn't just listen to that. She needs to see what it's doing to the Hound. She could have gone with him and watched him battle the mountain and seen, wow, this is going to be me if I keep doing this. I don't want to end up like him. And then she sees him die, and she realizes he bit off more than he can chew, but he was consumed by revenge. Why? Why can't she just, see that and then go and then try to escape? Let's not mention the plot armor of the second to last episode, where she should have died about 8 times, but she's a main character and we need a point of view to watch, so she just narrowly escapes everything, and she's the only person to survive. This is the thing that George R.R. Martin clearly explained he doesn't like, is when a main character's in a situation they're gonna die, they should die. Because it's what makes sense. It's realistic. It's not saving them just so they can be in the show more. It doesn't make sense, and that's not what Game of Thrones has ever been about. Look at Robb. Robb was a main character, and he died because he made a stupid mistake. Look at Ned. Ned was the main character of the first season, and he died because he wasn't smart enough to figure out how to get out of the situation. Being a main character, having honor, being a good guy is enough to keep you alive. You have to be smart in this universe, and that's what they forgot. As for Theon, I like how he was handled in the end of the season. It was probably one of the sadder moments because I started to really care about Theon. Yes, Theon was cocky at the start of the series, and yes, he made a terrible mistake, but did he deserve what he went through? No. He did not deserve to be castrated and tortured and dehumanized and looked down upon. He was this weak, frail little man, and he redeemed himself. He didn't do much, but he died fighting for the house that raised him, and that confirmation from Bronn was so satisfying. That was a good ending for Theon. They understood his character, and he was developed. It was developed where he was going. The same thing with Jorah. He always was going to fight by Daenerys, and that's how he died. Theon needed to be redeemed, so he died redeeming himself. Those two were handled well. I want to talk about Tyrion, Tyrion was my favorite character up until after season 6, because the writers basically used his archetype of he's a witty, smart Lannister dwarf, and that's all he was. He wasn't cunning, he wasn't smart enough to think his way out of situations. Just look how many times he got him or other people out of a bad situation, and that was all just because he was smart. And he was one of my favorite characters because of this, and because he had a very tragic backstory, not as tragic as other characters, but they sort of just forgot that Tyrion is supposed to be the smartest guy in the room. Him, Varys, and Littlefinger are the smartest people in the show, and they sort of forgot that with all three of them with their conclusions. Varys basically died for no reason at all. Also, I forgot to talk about Jaime. Jaime's character, that line about the innocence, him not caring about innocent people, totally conflicts with his Kingslayer story, but it makes sense that he would go back to Cersei. But I feel like it was disappointing. He just died under rubble. It makes sense that he go back to Cersei because he did everything for love, and he loved her more than anyone, and he would go back to her to be with her in these final moments. So that makes sense, but I feel like it could have been handled better. Now, the reason I was in denial is because there were some things that I did like about the finale. Some things that I liked were, I liked subtly seeing that Podrick was a knight. Him standing there in that armor just made me happy. I'm glad, because Podrick was one of my favorite minor characters. He was very loyal and brave, and I thought he deserved that. Brienne writing Jaime's story was one of the more touching moments in the end. Also, probably my favorite moments in the entirety of season 8 was Jaime knighting Brienne. That was very heartfelt, and I thought that was just a great moment. I like some of the early season callbacks, like how they told Tyrion and after the Battle of Blackwater that they won't write songs about him, and then they didn't put him in the book, except even though that didn't make any sense. I kind of liked the subtle nod, but he was the hand to the king and the hand to the queen, and he was a Lannister, and he was accused of killing the king, and he killed Tywin Lannister, one of the most powerful and rich men alive, and he wasn't in the book. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. He was a very important person, and so I just thought it was a dumb gag and nod, and it wasn't done well at all. I like Tyrion's brothel story that he told multiple times before. I like that nod. I like the King in the North callback with Sansa. It makes perfect sense for her character arc to be the Queen of the North, and they're chanting her name. Maybe she could have done more in season 8, besides just not like Daenerys, but I liked where she ended up. Again, I wasn't really upset with what happened as much as how it happened, and I think that's the main takeaway for Season 8. Although Seasons 7 and 8 were disappointing, they had their moments, and before that, the show, I would argue, is nearly perfect. It is as good as you can get with writing, with the rules they set up, that nobody was safe. Being good isn't enough to keep you alive, and subversion of expectations where it makes sense and not just for the sake of doing it. I liked where the characters ended up. It makes sense for Jon to go back to the Wall. It makes sense for Arya to go explore out on her own. It makes sense for Sansa to be the Warden of the North. It just doesn't make sense how rushed it was, and that's why the writers should have passed it on to someone else who was passionate about this project and understood the characters. So that pretty much sums up my thoughts. A perfect show ended by a lazy ending, and it makes me angry because of how much I cared about this show. I'm sure many of you feel the same. For the finale, the entirety of Season 8, I'd probably give it a 5 out of 10 because there were good moments, and they wrapped up all the storylines, and it was there, but it was very disappointing the way in which it was done. So, yep. And then for the entire show, despite the disappointing ending, I'd probably give it a 9 out of 10, which is hard because it's hard to recommend this show knowing where it's going. The whole point of the show is to see who's going to end up on the Iron Throne, basically, and to see where these characters are going, and where they end up is disappointing. But there are some great moments that are worth watching, and 6 seasons of pure gold to watch. So I would recommend watching it, even though the ending is disappointing. So that's basically my thoughts on the Game of Thrones finale.